The fluorescent lights in Dr. Morrison's office buzzed with a persistent hum that seemed to match the ringing in my ears. I sat across from him, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching his mouth move, but barely processing the words. "Stage 3, he said, his voice careful and measured. "Mrs. Caldwell, I won't lie to you, this is serious, but with aggressive treatment, we have options. Cancer." The word hung in the air between us like smoke, heavy and suffocating. I was 62 years old. I'd raised my son Daniel alone after his father walked out when Daniel was 3. I'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college, denied myself countless comforts so he could have opportunities I never had. I'd poured everything into being a good mother, into giving him a better life, and now, sitting in this sterile office with its motivational posters and fake plants, I was being told my body was turning against me. "What's the prognosis?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Doctor," Morrison shifted in his chair. "With treatment, we're looking at a 60% 5-year survival rate. Without it—" He paused. "Mrs. Caldwell, I strongly recommend we begin chemotherapy immediately." I nodded slowly, my mind already racing ahead. Treatment would be expensive. My insurance would cover some of it, but not all. I'd have to dip into my savings, the nest egg I'd been carefully building for 30 years, the money I'd planned to use to finally travel, to see the world I'd only read about in books. But what choice did I have? "When do we start?" I asked. As I left the hospital that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Dinner tonight? Melissa wants to talk to you about something." Melissa, my daughter-in-law of 2 years. I'd never quite warmed to her, though I'd tried. There was something calculating in her eyes, something that reminded me of a cat watching a bird through a window. But Daniel loved her, and that was supposed to be enough. I texted back, "Of course, 7 p.m. Perfect, love you, Mom." I stared at those 3 words for a long moment. "Love you, Mom." When was the last time he'd said that in person? When was the last time we'd had a real conversation, just the 2 of us, without Melissa steering the dialogue or checking her phone? I pushed the thought away. I was being paranoid, emotional. The diagnosis had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button. Your support means everything, and it helps me bring more powerful stories to life. Let's continue together. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Daniel's house, the one I'd helped him buy with a substantial down payment from my savings, sat in an upscale neighborhood I could never have afforded at his age. Melissa had expensive taste, and somehow my son, who'd once been content with second-hand furniture and home-cooked meals, had adopted those same tastes. I rang the doorbell, clutching a bottle of wine I couldn't really afford, but had bought anyway because showing up empty-handed felt wrong. Melissa answered, her smile bright and cold as winter sunlight. "Margaret, come in, come in." She was wearing what looked like a designer dress, her dark hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. I suddenly felt shabby in my department store slacks and simple blouse. "Something smells wonderful," I said, stepping inside. "Oh, we ordered Thai food. I've been so busy with the interior design project for the Henderson's estate. You understand?" I didn't, actually. I'd worked 50-hour weeks and still managed to cook dinner every night, but I smiled and nodded. Daniel emerged from the kitchen, and my heart squeezed at the sight of him. He looked so much like his father. The same dark eyes, the same strong jawline. But where his father had been weak and selfish, I'd raised Daniel to be better, or so I'd thought. "Mom!" He hugged me, and for a moment I let myself sink into his embrace. He was my son, my boy, the person I loved most in the world. "How are you feeling?" he asked, pulling back to look at me. "You look tired." I hesitated. I'd planned to tell him about the diagnosis over dinner, to prepare him gently, but something in Melissa's expression, a sharpness, an anticipation, made me pause. "Just a long day at work," I said instead. "Nothing serious." We sat down at their dining room table, and Melissa served the takeout on her expensive china. The conversation was light, superficial. Melissa talked about her design projects, about the yacht club membership they were considering, about the vacation to Santorini they were planning. I listened, sipping my wine, wondering when we'd get to whatever it was they wanted to discuss. Finally, as Melissa cleared the plates, Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. "Mum, there's something we need to talk to you about." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" He exchanged a glance with Melissa, who'd returned to stand beside him, her hand on his shoulder in a gesture that felt more possessive than affectionate. "It's about your house," Daniel said. "My house. The 3-bedroom craftsman I'd bought 25 years ago, when Daniel was still in high school. The place where he'd grown up, where every room held memories of his childhood. The home I'd scrimped and saved to purchase, that I'd lovingly maintained and improved over the years." "What about it?" I asked carefully. Daniel's expression was earnest, almost pleading. "Mom, you're getting older. That house is too much for you to manage, the yard, the maintenance, the stairs. I'm 62, Daniel, not 90. I know. He squeezed my hand. "But Melissa and I have been thinking. Her parents are retiring next year, moving here from Connecticut. They're looking for a place to live and, well, your house would be perfect for them." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Perfect for them." Melissa leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What Daniel means is that we'd like to help you downsize. We've found a lovely senior living community, not a nursing home. Nothing like that. It's more like a resort. You'd have your own apartment, no maintenance to worry about, activities, people your own age." "I'm not interested in senior living," I said, hearing the edge in my voice. "Mum." Daniel's tone turned patient, patronizing. The voice you'd use with a confused child. "Be reasonable. You're alone in that big house. What if something happens? What if you fall or have a medical emergency? I have neighbors. I have friends. I have a life. And you'd still have a life," Melissa interjected. "Just a simpler one, less stressful. And my parents would take such good care of your house. They're very responsible people." Understanding dawned slowly, coldly. "You want me to give you my house so your parents can live in it?" "Not give," Daniel said quickly. "Sell. We'd buy it from you at a fair price, below market value," Melissa added with a smile. "But without all the hassle of listing it, dealing with realtors, staging, inspections. We'd make it easy for you." I stared at my son, this man I'd sacrificed everything for, and tried to see the boy I'd raised. The child who'd cried when our neighbor's cat died, who'd saved his allowance to buy me flowers on Mother's Day, who'd once told me I was the strongest person he knew. Where had that boy gone? "I need to think about it," I said, my voice hollow. "Of course," Daniel said, relief flooding his face. "Take your time, just don't take too long, okay? Mom's parents need to make a decision soon." I noticed he called them Mom's parents when talking to me, not Melissa's parents or the in-laws. A subtle shift, making them my family too, whether I wanted them or not. I left shortly after, claiming exhaustion. As I drove home through the dark streets, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, I finally allowed myself to cry. My son wanted my house. Not for himself, for his wife's parents. People I'd met exactly twice, at the wedding and at one strained holiday dinner. And he wanted me to go quietly into some sterile apartment complex, to fade into the background of his life like an inconvenient obligation he'd finally managed. When I got home, I walked through every room, touching the walls I'd painted, the floors I'd refinished, the garden I'd tended. This was my home, my sanctuary, the one thing in my life that was truly, completely mine, and I was supposed to just hand it over. I stood in Daniel's old bedroom, now my home office, looking at the photos on the wall. Daniel at his high school graduation, Daniel at college, Daniel at his wedding, Melissa pressed against his side, her eyes on the camera with that calculating look. That's when the anger started to replace the hurt. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The cancer diagnosis, the pressure about the house, it had all been swirling in my mind, making me feel powerless and overwhelmed. But I wasn't powerless. I'd survived a cheating husband, single motherhood, decades of financial struggle, and climbing the corporate ladder in a male-dominated industry. I'd built a life from nothing, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my own son, take it away from me. I called Dr. Morrison's office and scheduled my first chemotherapy session. Then I called my lawyer, Robert Chen, whom I'd worked with when buying my house. "Margaret, it's been years," Robert said warmly. "What can I do for you?" "I need advice about my property," I said, "and I need to update my will." We met that afternoon in his downtown office. I explained the situation, Daniel's request, Melissa's parents, the pressure to sell and downsize. Robert frowned. "And you don't want to sell?" "Absolutely not. This is my home. I've worked my entire life to have this security, this stability. I'm not ready to give it up, especially not below market value, to accommodate my daughter-in-law's family." "Then don't," Robert said simply. "It's your property. You have no legal obligation to sell." "I know, but I want to make sure it stays that way. I hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. "I've been diagnosed with cancer, stage 3. I'm starting treatment, and the prognosis is decent, but I need to be realistic. I want to make sure my house stays mine, and that if something happens to me, it goes where I want it to go, not automatically to Daniel." Robert's expression softened with sympathy, but his voice remained professional. "I understand. Let's talk about your options." Over the next hour, we discussed trusts, transfer on death deeds, and updated will provisions. By the time I left his office, I had a plan in place to protect my assets, but I wasn't done. That evening, I did something I wasn't proud of, but felt was necessary. I went to Daniel and Melissa's house while they were both at work. I still had a key from when I'd house sit for them during their honeymoon. I told myself I was just checking on things, being a concerned mother. But really, I was looking for answers, looking for the truth behind this sudden urgency to get me out of my house. I found it in Melissa's home office, in a folder labeled Property Development. My hands shook as I flipped through the documents. Architectural plans, contractor estimates, marketing, materials. They weren't planning to let Melissa's parents live in my house. They were planning to tear it down. The lot, my home, was zoned for multifamily development. With the right permits, it could hold a small apartment complex or several townhomes. The property value wasn't just what the house was worth, it was what the land was worth to a developer. And the documents showed that Daniel and Melissa had already been in talks with a development company. They had preliminary agreements in place, contingent on acquiring the property. They were going to buy my house below market value, demolish it, and sell the land for what looked like nearly 3 times what they'd paid me. The profit would be substantial, enough to pay off their mortgage, fund Melissa's boutique interior design firm, maybe buy that yacht club membership they'd been eyeing. I sat in Melissa's expensive ergonomic chair, surrounded by her perfectly curated office decor, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't about my safety or my convenience. This was about money. My son was willing to manipulate me, to prey on my fears about aging and my love for him, all so he could make a profit off my home. I carefully photographed every document with my phone, then put everything back exactly as I'd found it. As I locked the door behind me and drove away, I felt the last remnants of motherly denial fall away. If Daniel wanted to play games with my property, my security, my future, then I'd play too, but I'd play to win. The chemotherapy was worse than I'd anticipated. Dr. Morrison had warned me about the side effects, nausea, fatigue, hair loss, but experiencing them was different from knowing they were coming. I started treatment on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I could barely get out of bed. I'd taken a leave of absence from my job as a senior financial analyst at Harrison & Associates. My boss, Patricia, had been understanding but distant. At 62, I was already past normal. Retirement age in most people's eyes. I could read between the lines. They didn't expect me to come back. Daniel called during my second week of treatment. "Mom, you sound terrible." Are you sick? I almost laughed at the irony. Just a bad cold, I lied. I'll be fine. Well, have you thought more about the house? We really need an answer soon. Melissa's parents are getting anxious. I was lying in bed, a bucket beside me in case I needed to vomit again, my body aching like I'd been beaten. And my son was calling to pressure me about real estate. I'm not selling, Daniel. Silence. Then, Mum, don't be stubborn about this. We're trying to help you. Help me or help yourselves. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know about the development plans. I know you're not giving the house to Melissa's parents. I know you want to tear it down and sell the land. More silence. Then Daniel's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. You went through our things. You broke into our house. I have a key. And yes, I looked through your office. Because I knew something wasn't right, Daniel. I knew you weren't telling me the truth. We were going to tell you eventually. After everything was settled. After you were comfortable in your new place. We didn't want you to worry about the details. The details? You mean the fact that you're planning to profit off the home I spent 25 years paying for? The home I raised you in? That house is just sitting there, Mum. You're alone. In it. It's too much space, too much work. This way, everybody wins. You get a nice apartment with no responsibilities. Melissa's parents get to relocate. And yes, we make some money to secure our future. What's wrong with that? Everything, I wanted to scream. Everything is wrong with that. But I was too tired, too sick. I'm not selling, I repeated. That's my final answer. You're being selfish, Daniel said. And I heard Melissa's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. You're putting your attachment to a building over your son's financial security, over our future, over any grandchildren we might have. The mention of grandchildren was a low blow, and he knew it. I'd been dropping hints for years, hoping, wanting to be a grandmother. Now he was weaponizing that desire against me. Goodbye, Daniel, I said and hung up. I cried then. Deep, wrenching sobs that hurt my chest and made my head pound. I cried for the son I'd lost somewhere along the way, for the relationship that had curdled into this ugly transactional thing, for the future I'd imagined that would never exist. But beneath the grief, something else was growing, something harder, sharper, determination. What Daniel didn't know, what no one knew except my lawyer and my accountant, was that I wasn't just a senior financial analyst. I was very, very good at my job. Over my 30-year career at Harrison & Associates, I'd managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I'd helped clients navigate complex tax situations, structure trusts, and protect their assets. I'd learned from the best lawyers, accountants, and financial strategists in the business. And I'd applied those lessons to my own life. My house wasn't just a house. It was part of a carefully constructed financial plan that I'd been building since Daniel left for college. While I'd lived modestly, driving the same car for 15 years and shopping at discount stores, I'd been investing aggressively. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate investment trusts. I'd bought a rental property in a college town 10 years ago that had appreciated significantly. I'd invested early in several tech startups that had paid off handsomely. My net worth was approximately $2.3 million. Daniel knew I was comfortable. He didn't know I was wealthy. I'd never told him because I didn't want money to change our relationship. I'd seen it happen with clients countless times. Adult children becoming suddenly attentive when they learned about a parent's assets, families torn apart over inheritances. I'd wanted Daniel to love me for who I was, not what I could give him. Now, lying in bed recovering from my third chemotherapy session, I realized what a naive hope that had been. Melissa had done a financial analysis on me, I was certain. She'd seen the house, calculated its value, and decided I was an asset to be acquired. She just didn't know the full scope of what she was dealing with. I hope you're finding this story as powerful as I found writing it. If you'd like to see more content like this, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach people who need them most. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you for being part of this community. As I recovered from that round of treatment, I started planning. Not revenge. I didn't think of it that way. Justice. Consequences. A lesson that needed to be taught. First, I contacted a private investigator, a woman named Sarah Chen, no relation to my lawyer, who'd worked on several cases for Harrison and Associates clients. I need background information on someone, I told her over the phone. My daughter-in-law and her family. Looking for anything specific? Sarah asked, her voice professional and non-judgmental. Anything that might explain why they're so desperate for money. Financial troubles, debts, legal issues, whatever you can find. Sarah called back a week later. Mrs. Caldwell, you might want to sit down for this. Melissa's father, Richard Sutton, had been a successful investment banker in Connecticut. Past tense. 3 years ago, he'd been fired for insider trading, nothing ever proven publicly, but the firm had let him go with a quiet severance package and an NDA. Since then, he'd burned through his savings trying to maintain their lifestyle. The Suttons were in debt, serious debt. Credit cards maxed out, a second mortgage on their Connecticut home, and creditors circling. Melissa's mother, Patricia, had her own issues. She was a compulsive shopper with a gambling problem. She'd racked up significant losses at the Foxwoods casino. No wonder Melissa had been so eager to marry Daniel, a man with a solid job in software development and a mother with a valuable property. No wonder they were pushing so hard for me to sell. They needed money, badly. There's more, Sarah said. Melissa herself has been operating her interior design business at a significant loss. She's been using her clients' deposits to pay off personal expenses, then scrambling to complete projects on a shoestring budget. She's one audit away from serious legal trouble. I thanked Sarah and sat back in my chair, processing this information. My son had married a woman from a family of financial criminals and compulsive spenders, and now they were circling my assets like vultures. Well, I thought grimly, two can play at that game. By my 5th round of chemotherapy, I'd lost most of my hair. I wore scarves and hats, but mostly I just embraced the baldness. There was something freeing about it, actually. No more pretending, no more vanity. I looked sick. I was sick. But I was also stronger than I'd been in years, because I had purpose. Daniel had stopped calling. Melissa had sent a few cold, brief text messages, but I'd ignored them. They thought I was being stubborn and irrational. They thought eventually I'd cave, or die, and they'd get what they wanted. They had no idea what was coming. I called Daniel in late November, right before Thanksgiving. "Mom," he sounded surprised. "Are you okay?" "I need to talk to you," I said, letting my voice sound weak and shaky. It wasn't entirely an act. Chemotherapy had left me genuinely exhausted. "Can you come over, please?" "Of course. Is it serious?" "Very serious. Just you, Daniel, not Melissa. This is between us." He arrived an hour later, letting himself in. With his own key. I was sitting in the living room, wrapped in blankets despite the warm heater, looking as frail as possible. His face went pale when he saw me. "Mom, what happened to you?" "Sit down, honey," I said softly. He sat, and I watched the concern in his eyes, the sudden fear. For a moment he looked like my little boy again, the child who'd needed me. "I have cancer," I said simply. "Stage 3. I've been going through chemotherapy for the past 2 months." The color drained from his face completely. "What? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to burden you, and because—" I paused, letting a tear slide down my cheek. "Because I was angry about the house. I was being stubborn and prideful, and I didn't want you to know how scared I was." "Mom," he moved to sit beside me, taking my hand. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Forget about the house. That doesn't matter. All that matters is you getting better." I let him hold me, feeling the irony cut deep. This concern, this love, it had taken a cancer diagnosis to bring it out. Where had it been before? Where had it been when I'd raised him alone, worked myself to exhaustion to give him opportunities, sacrificed my own dreams so he could achieve his? "There's something else," I said, my voice breaking. "The treatment isn't working as well as they hoped. Dr. Morrison says I might have a year, maybe less." This was a lie. The treatment was actually going reasonably well. Dr. Morrison was cautiously optimistic about my prognosis, but Daniel didn't need to know that. "No," Daniel whispered. "No, that can't be right. There must be other treatments. Experimental options." "I'm tired, Daniel," I said, which was true. "I'm 62 years old, and I'm tired. I've lived a good life. I raised a wonderful son. I have no regrets." I was lying through my teeth. I had many regrets. My son had become one of them. "About the house," I continued. "You were right. It's too much for me. I'm not going to be around long enough to enjoy it anyway." I let my voice crack. "I want you to have it. You and Melissa. I want to know that my home will stay in the family." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Mum, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I'm going to talk to my lawyer about transferring the deed. I want it done before." I trailed off meaningfully. "Before it's too late." He hugged me then, sobbing into my shoulder like he had as a child. "I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry about everything. I was being selfish and stupid. The house doesn't matter. You matter." "I know, sweetheart," I murmured, stroking his back. "I know." After he left, promising to come back the next day, I sat in the quiet living room and felt nothing but cold determination. He'd said the words I'd been desperate to hear my whole life, and I couldn't believe any of them. Because if he'd really loved me, if I'd really mattered, he wouldn't have tried to manipulate me out of my home in the first place. The next week, I contacted Robert Chen again. "I need you to prepare documents transferring my house to Daniel," I said. Robert was silent for a moment. "Margaret, we discussed protecting your assets. Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely sure. But I need you to do it a specific way." I explained my plan. Robert listened, occasionally making notes, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's surprisingly vindictive," he finally said. "Is it illegal?" "No." "Unethical, maybe?" "Effective?" "Definitely." "Then let's do it." Over the next 2 weeks, Robert prepared a complex web of documents. On the surface, they appeared to transfer ownership of my house to Daniel, but buried in the legal language that Melissa, with her surface-level understanding of contracts, would never fully comprehend, were conditions, clauses, and contingencies that would make the transfer a poisoned chalice. The house would transfer to Daniel with significant restrictions. It couldn't be sold or demolished for 5 years. It couldn't be used for commercial purposes. Any structural changes required approval from a preservation committee that I'd just created and funded, consisting of my lawyer, my accountant, and 2 neighbors who'd already agreed to deny any requests from Daniel. Additionally, the transfer came with a large lien against the property for care services rendered. Essentially, me backdating years of financial support I'd given Daniel and his wife, presented as loans rather than gifts. The lien amount just happened to be approximately equal to what the land would be worth to a developer. If Daniel wanted to sell the property to pay off the lien, he'd end up with basically nothing. If he wanted to keep the property, he'd be stuck with a house he couldn't develop, couldn't modify, and that would cost him property taxes he hadn't budgeted for. The beautiful part? All of this was completely legal. Creative, certainly. Aggressive? Absolutely. But legal. "When do you want to present this to him?" Robert asked. "Thanksgiving dinner," I said. "I'm hosting. Daniel, Melissa, and her parents will all be there." Robert raised an eyebrow. "You're feeling well enough to host Thanksgiving?" "I'm feeling well enough to do what needs to be done." Thanksgiving morning, I woke up early and started cooking. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, the full traditional feast. My energy was limited, but I paced myself, taking breaks when I needed to. By the time Daniel and Melissa arrived with her parents, the house smelled like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. "Mom, you shouldn't have gone to all this trouble," Daniel said, hugging me carefully as if I might break. Nonsense, I said, smiling. This might be my last Thanksgiving. I want it to be special. I'd lost more weight, looked even more fragile than I had a few weeks ago. Daniel's eyes were worried. Melissa's were calculating. Richard and Patricia. Sutton were exactly what I'd expected. Expensively dressed, impeccably groomed, and carrying themselves with the kind of desperate dignity of people who know they're in financial trouble but are determined not to show it. "Margaret, what a lovely home," Patricia said, her eyes scanning the room with an appraiser's intensity. "Such character, such potential." "Thank you," I said pleasantly. "My late husband and I bought it 30 years ago. I've put my heart and soul into maintaining it." We sat down to dinner, and the conversation was polite, superficial. Richard talked about his consulting business. Patricia talked about the exciting opportunities in their relocation. Melissa talked about her design projects, name-dropping wealthy clients I suspected were either fictional or hadn't paid her. Daniel was quiet, attentive to me, making sure I ate, asking if I was comfortable, playing the dutiful son. It might have been touching if I hadn't known better. Finally, as I served the pie, I said, "I have an announcement to make." Everyone looked up, Daniel with concern, Melissa with barely concealed anticipation. "I've made a decision about the house," I continued. "Daniel, you were right. This place is too much for me, so I've had my lawyer draw up papers to transfer the property to you." Melissa's face lit up like Christmas morning. Richard and Patricia exchanged quick, triumphant glances. Daniel just looked relieved. "Mum, are you sure?" he asked, but I could hear the eagerness behind the question. "Absolutely certain," I said, pulling out the folder of documents. "My lawyer will be here tomorrow to finalize everything. I wanted to tell you all together on Thanksgiving because I'm so grateful to have family, to know that my home will be in good hands." "This is wonderful news," Richard said, raising his wine glass. "To Margaret and to family." We toasted. I sipped my wine and watched them celebrating, their guards down, their greed showing through the veneer of concern and family feeling. They had no idea what they'd just agreed to. Robert Chen arrived the day after Thanksgiving with his briefcase and his professional smile. Daniel and Melissa came over, both dressed nicely, treating this like the formality it appeared to be. "This is very straightforward," Robert said, spreading the documents across my dining room table. "Mrs. Caldwell is transferring the property to Daniel Caldwell with immediate effect. There are just a few standard conditions we need to review." "Conditions?" Melissa asked, her antenna going up. "Oh, just typical transfer language," Robert said smoothly. "Preservation requirements, restrictions on commercial use, that sort of thing. Very standard for family property transfers." He went through the documents slowly, professionally, using enough legal jargon to make their eyes glaze over. I watched Melissa try to follow along, try to spot any red flags, but Robert was too good at what he did. And finally, Robert said, "There's the matter of the existing lien on the property." Daniel frowned. "Lien? I didn't know there was a lien." "Oh yes," Robert said, pulling out another document. "Your mother has been providing you with financial support over the years, the down payment on your current home, help with wedding expenses, various other costs. Per the terms of this transfer, those are now formalized as loans against the property." "How much?" Melissa asked, her voice sharp. Robert consulted the document. $847,000. The silence was deafening. "That's not possible," Melissa said. "There's no way." "It's all documented," Robert said, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. "Down payment $150,000. Wedding expenses $48,000. Various gifts and support over the years, compounded with reasonable interest. The remainder. I'd actually given Daniel closer to $200,000 over the years, but creative accounting and legal interest rates had inflated the figure to what I needed it to be. Daniel was staring at the numbers, his face pale. "Mom, what is this?" "It's exactly what it looks like," I said calmly. "Those were always meant to be loans, Daniel. I just never formalized them because I trusted you. But now, with my health declining, my lawyer advised me to make everything official. "This is ridiculous," Melissa said, standing up. "You can't just retroactively decide gifts were loans." "Actually," Robert said, "with proper documentation of intent, which Mrs. Caldwell has maintained, yes, she can. All of these transfers were made with the implicit understanding that they would be repaid, evidenced by various emails and conversations that Mrs. Caldwell has saved. I had saved them. Every text where Daniel had said, 'I'll pay you back someday.' Every email where I'd mentioned helping him get started. All of it was admissible as evidence of loan intent." "And the other restrictions?" Melissa asked, grabbing the main transfer document. "This says we can't sell for 5 years? Can't make structural changes?" "That's correct," Robert said. "This is a historical property in a neighborhood that's petitioning for landmark status. Mrs. Caldwell, as a condition of the transfer, has established a preservation committee to protect the home's character." "You set up a committee?" Daniel asked me, his voice rising. "To control what we can do with the house you're giving us?" "To protect what I've built," I said quietly. "This house is my legacy, Daniel. I wanted to make sure it would be respected." Melissa was frantically reading through the documents now, her face getting redder with each page. "This is a trap. This whole thing is a trap." "I prefer to think of it as justice," I said, my voice still calm. "You wanted my house so badly. You were willing to manipulate me, lie to me, exploit my trust and my love for my son. Well, now you have it. Enjoy." "We don't want it," Melissa snapped. "Not like this." "Unfortunately," Robert said, "Daniel has already signed the preliminary acceptance documents at Thanksgiving dinner, and the transfer is irrevocable once initiated. The house is now legally Daniel's, along with all associated obligations, restrictions, and debts." Daniel looked at me, and I saw something break in his expression. "You knew, all along, you knew what we were planning." "Of course I knew," I said. "I'm not senile, Daniel. I'm not a foolish old woman you can trick and manipulate. I'm your mother. I raised you better than this, even if you forgot those lessons somewhere along the way." "The cancer," Melissa said suddenly. "You're not dying, are you?" I smiled. "Oh, I have cancer. Stage 3, just like I told you. And the chemotherapy has been brutal. But Dr. Morrison says my prognosis is actually quite good. 60% chance of 5-year survival, maybe longer." I stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the garden I'd spent 25 years cultivating. "You see, the funny thing about facing death is that it clarifies things. It shows you who really loves you and who just loves what you can give them. You, Daniel, you failed that test. You chose money over your mother. You chose your wife's ambitions over our relationship, and you did it while I was at my most vulnerable. Mom, I'm not finished." I turned back to face them. "You're going to leave now. You're going to take those documents and that house that you wanted so badly, and you're going to live with the consequences of your choices. Maybe you'll figure out how to pay off the lien. Maybe you'll find a way around the restrictions. Or maybe you'll just be stuck with a property you can't develop, can't sell, and have to pay taxes and maintenance on for the next 5 years." "This is insane," Melissa hissed. "We could sue you." "You could try," Robert said pleasantly, "but everything here is completely legal. Aggressive, certainly, but legal. And if you do sue, Mrs. Caldwell is prepared to countersue for attempted elder fraud, which carries significant penalties in this state." Daniel stood up, his hands shaking. "I can't believe you do this to me. I'm your son." "And I'm your mother," I said, my voice finally breaking. "The woman who gave up everything for you, who worked 2 jobs to put you through college, who supported your dreams, your marriage, your life. And the moment I was vulnerable, the moment I was sick and scared, you saw me as a resource to be exploited." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. "Get out," I said. "Get out of my house. The house that's still mine because I'm not moving anywhere. I'm going to live here, fight my cancer, and spend whatever time I have left with people who actually care about me." They left. Daniel paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pain? Regret? Anger? All 3? "I hope you're happy," he said quietly. "No," I replied, "but I'm free." The next weeks were interesting. Daniel and Melissa tried to find loopholes in the transfer documents, but Robert had done his job too well. They consulted other lawyers, all of whom told them the same thing. They were stuck. The house was theirs, but it was worthless to them. They couldn't develop it, couldn't sell it quickly, and the lien made it a massive financial liability. Meanwhile, I found out through Sarah Chen that Richard Sutton's creditors had started aggressive collection actions. The Suttons had been counting on the profit from my property to solve their financial problems. Without it, their house of cards was collapsing. Melissa's interior design business imploded within a month. One of her clients filed a complaint with the state licensing board about misappropriated deposits. An investigation was opened. Her carefully constructed facade of success crumbled, revealing the debt and desperation beneath. I didn't feel triumphant watching this unfold. I felt sad. Sad for the son I'd lost, for the relationship that had been broken, beyond repair, for the family I'd wanted but would never have. But I didn't feel guilty. My cancer treatment continued. Some days were harder than others. The chemotherapy made me sick, tired, weak. But I had friends who brought me meals, neighbors who checked on me, colleagues from work who visited. I had a life outside of being Daniel's mother. I'd forgotten that, lost it somewhere in my decades of single-minded focus on giving him everything. Now I was remembering who I was. Margaret. Caldwell, financial analyst, survivor, fighter, not just someone's mother, not just someone's victim. In February, 3 months after that terrible Thanksgiving, Daniel called me. "Mom." His voice was small, unsure. "Yes? Can we talk? In person?" I almost said no. But something in his voice, genuine pain, not manipulation, made me pause. "Come over tomorrow," I said. "Just you." He arrived the next afternoon. I made coffee, and we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place. We'd shared thousands of meals over the years. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm so sorry, Mom. You were right about everything, about Melissa, about her parents, about the way I treated you. I was selfish and greedy and stupid." "Yes, you were." He flinched but nodded. "Melissa and I are separated. I've moved out. The marriage is over." I felt a complicated mix of relief and sadness. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. You were right about her too. She didn't love me. She loved what she thought I could give her, what you could give her. When the money didn't materialize, when her parents' problems got worse, she showed me who she really was." "And who are you, Daniel?" I asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment. "I don't know anymore. I thought I knew. I thought I was successful, smart, building a good life. But I became someone I don't recognize. Someone who would hurt his own mother for money." "You did," I agreed, "and that's something you'll have to live with. Can you forgive me?" I looked at my son, this man who'd caused me such pain, but who I still loved despite everything. "Eventually, maybe. But trust. That's going to take a long time to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you." "I don't want the rest of your life," I said. "I want honesty. I want respect. I want you to treat me like a person, not a resource." "I will. I promise." We talked for hours that day, really talked for the first time in years. He told me about the pressure from Melissa, the way she'd manipulated him, the way he'd convinced himself that what he was doing was for the best. I told him about the cancer, the treatment, the fear I'd been carrying alone, because I'd felt I couldn't share it with him. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Epilogue. Rising stronger. A year later, I'm still here, still fighting, still alive. My cancer is in remission. Dr. Morrison says the treatment was even more successful than he'd hoped. I'm not cured. Cancer is never quite that simple. But I'm healthy, strong, determined to live every day I have left with purpose. Daniel and I have slowly, carefully rebuilt our relationship. He comes over for dinner once a week. We talk about real things now. His therapy sessions where he's working through his issues, my volunteer work at the Cancer Support Center, books we've read, movies we've seen. He's not asking for forgiveness anymore. He's just trying to be a better person. That's all I can ask. The house is still mine. I've decided to donate it to a local charity when I die, an organization that provides temporary housing for women escaping domestic violence. It seems fitting, a home built on one woman's strength and survival, passed on to help other women find their own strength. Melissa and her parents left the state. I heard through friends that Richard Sutton declared bankruptcy. Patricia is supposedly in treatment for her gambling addiction. Melissa is working as a saleswoman at a furniture store in Ohio. Not the glamorous life she'd envisioned. I don't feel joy at their downfall. I feel nothing, really. They're gone from my life, and that's enough. What I've learned from all of this is simple but profound. Your value isn't determined by what you can give others. Your worth isn't measured by your usefulness to your children, your family, your job. You have inherent value simply because you exist, because you've survived, because you've fought your battles and carried your burdens and still gotten up every morning to face another day. To anyone reading this who's ever felt used, manipulated, or taken for granted by the people they love, you deserve better. You deserve respect, honesty, genuine care. And if you're not getting those things, you have every right to set boundaries, to protect yourself, to fight for the life and security you've built. Don't let anyone, not even your own children, treat you as a resource to be exploited. You are more than that. You are stronger than you know. And sometimes, the greatest act of love you can perform is refusing to be a victim. Stand up, set boundaries, protect what's yours, and never ever apologize for refusing to be diminished. Thank you for staying with me through this powerful journey. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or made you think differently about family, boundaries, and self-worth, I invite you to share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more transformative stories, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experiences. Your engagement helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Remember, you are worthy of respect, dignity, and genuine love. Never settle for less. Until next time, stay strong and stay true to yourself.